Hello, Michael here with another RenderMan 22 tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at LPEs. And if you don't know, LPEs are basically, well, what it stands for is Light Path Expressions. And it's essentially a way of customizing AOV outputs so you can get specific either lights or lit objects or light paths essentially rendered out as separate AOVs. AOVs and LPEs can sometimes be used interchangeably, but essentially what we're talking about here is the LPE that makes up a separate path, which can be considered an AOV. So I've got a little scene here with 3-point light setup, and if I just render it here, you will see that it is just as you see there. It's a 3-point light setup with a rim light in the back. I've got a little fill on the right and a key in the front. And this one we're going to rename to key so we can remember it. And the other two I'm not going to really use for anything specific, so it doesn't matter. And I've got them grouped so I could transform them at the same time. This is my ground plane. I'm going to rename that to ground. And I've already obviously put materials on everything. You will also need to set your project, save your scene. I'm going to do that now. So when you do your batch render, which if you're using AOVs you do need a batch render, the files will be output to the correct directory. Okay, so let's jump into the render settings. We'll jump into the RenderMan tab and then AOVs. On the right here you've got your AOVs. On the left you've got your AOVs that you can add in. By default, it's got a beauty pass, which has got an alpha channel with it. The beauty pass is actually made up of an LPE, and we'll start by actually creating our own beauty pass. So just on the left-hand column here, we're going to click plus. We're going to call this diffuse_beauty. Now, the reason I'm giving it the diffuse prefix is because if I want to use denoising, the denoiser actually needs to sort of know what this channel is going to be made up of to figure out how it should run the denoising program essentially. So for this I'm just going to use diffuse. I'm going to use diffuse for all of them. If you are using a specular channel, obviously you'll want to use specular as your prefix. There is further information on this on the RenderMan wiki, which I will link to in the description. Hopefully I remember. If I don't remember again, please just let me know in the comments and I'll add it. But there's a lot of good useful information there, and this is just going to be a sort of starter. So I'm not going to be able to tell you how to do every single sort of scenario, but hopefully this will get you on the right track to set your own up. So to do the beauty, basically we've got the channel source here, and this is where we type out our expression. So always your expression is going to start LPE. Also, a weird bug is sometimes if you hit shift when you're in this field, it tabs out. I have no idea. It could be just my Maya, but it does that. So LPE colon and then C. C means camera. Now, when you do a LPE, it's made up of 3 parts essentially, and I'll just sort of bracket them in here for the moment. What you're rendering, which is going to be, you know, your diffuse or your specular channels. If you're using subsurface scattering, you'll be using transmissive diffuse, so on and so forth. And then it is the light path, and after that it is the lights that you're using. So the light path, you can determine how many bounces, which bounces you want to use. You might want to use the 2nd and the 4th bounce, or you might want to use all of them, or just after a certain point. And the lights, you can isolate lights in the scene. You can use all the lights by default with a specific input. Okay, so we're going to start our expression as LPE semicolon C for camera. And we're going to open brackets, or less than, if you are looking at it that way. And then we're going to use square brackets for our first input, which is going to be reflection transmissive, which is essentially your specular. And then your diffuse will be D for diffuse and S for specular. In this case, it's diffused reflection and indirect. So direct diffuse and indirect diffuse. Close brackets, and then we will close it with the greater than sign. Full stop. Asterisk. Now the asterisk is basically meaning that it's going to be a value of 0 or greater than. So in the instance that we're using it here, it's going to be 0 light bounces or greater than. So anything more than 0 essentially. So an amount basically. And then we're going to open another square bracket, and sometimes when you hit shift it tabs you out, which is really useful. Thanks, Maya. Then we use a less than sign, L, full stop. This means all lights, and then we'll close this, and then capital O will be any emissive object, so that means visible lights and any object that has got light emission on it. And then again we will just close with square brackets. So that is the same as your beauty pass. So if we want to create that now, we can create a new channel here. Actually, this is what we need to be naming diffuse. Sorry, so this is actually our diffuse beauty. This you can actually call whatever you want, but this is where you enable the denoise function. So you want to have it in there. Then we're going to select our diffuse. We'll just, can I rename that? No, I can't rename that without deleting it. We're just going to leave it there for the moment. It's called diffuse beauty there. You can see it on the right now. Now there's a couple of things we can do to actually make this a little bit easier to read. If you're going to be just basically using a beauty, you can use full stops to indicate that you are happy to use basically anything in these two fields. So it will mean your specular, one full stop, and diffuse, two full stops. Just that simple. Which for most cases, unless you're defining something specific, you're just going to use those full stops. And then we can just leave the asterisk, no full stop, because the full stop is not necessary in this case. And generally I always, just as a habit, will use this field at the end, just so I don't accidentally omit something by mistake. But you could actually write this out as just, again with the shift, LO, and that will give you the same thing. So when we run an IPR, we will enable denoising on that one, and we will not enable denoising on our regular render pass, which is our regular beauty pass. And if we run an IPR in the it viewer, you can see that I can't denoise this. That's me hitting N. Oh, I can actually. Interesting. Well, we can denoise this. Now, this is something I've noticed with the denoiser, and it doesn't like denoising these passes. I don't know if I'm doing something incorrectly. I'm pretty confident I'm doing it right, but it does actually denoise them when it batch renders it out. So if you hit N and it looks like this, then don't worry too much. But yeah, so that is our beauty pass, and that is the pass we just made up. Obviously they look identical because they are the same LPE. So we can get rid of that because we already have a beauty pass, so that's fine. So now that we know a little bit about what all that means, what can we do with it? Well, we've got a couple of objects in our scene. Let's say, for instance, isolate this sphere. So to do that, we're going to have to select the sphere, and on the right hand side of the attribute editor, we'll go into the RenderMan lobe, and we've got this field here, which allows you to add a string, which you want to call something to determine the LPE group. In this case, I'm just going to call it sphere. And while I'm at it, I'm going to do the same on the cube. I'm going to call the cube cube. I'm going to call the ground ground, and I'm going to call the key key. Now, I'm not actually going to do it in the LPE group. I'm going to do it in the shape, and we want to go down to, where is that? Advanced and light group, because this is a light. This isn't going to be used as an object. We're going to use this as a light. This is not the first field, what we're rendering. This is the last field, what lights we're using. So we're going to call this key. So now let's make it so we are just rendering this sphere. So a new channel, this is going to be called sphere, and we're going to call this LPE colon, as you remember, capital C and less than, and we're going to call it, we're going to take specular and diffuse for it, and then within the same bracket we're going to use the apostrophe and type in sphere and close the apostrophe, and then close that bracket, and then full stop, asterisk, and then we're going to use all lights. So this is going to be L dot, sorry, it's going to be L dot capital O close bracket, and we'll create a new display driver there, and we'll call that diffuse sphere, and we'll add that in. Select on the left, select thing on the right, and then use the add in button or create a new node. And then if we render this, so that's our beauty render, and then this is the same thing but with just our sphere. Now what you'll notice is, if you're looking at the sphere, it is picking up the reflection from the ground still. Might be a little bit hard to see when I'm bouncing backwards and forth, but it is, just trust me. Which can be very, very useful. Now you could obviously do this with Cryptomats, but sometimes you will need to use an LPE for specific things. I'll show you an example at the end of the video tutorial, a scene that I used it for. Alright, so that is an example of isolating an object. So now why don't we try isolating a light. So we're going to call this rim. This is going to be our rim light. We'll do the same thing again, LPE, hold down shift, get tabbed out, re-click in, capital C, less than, and we're going to do full stop, and close. This is basically beauty. Asterisk, and then the same as before, we're going to open bracket and then open the other type of bracket, I've forgotten the name of that, less than, and we're going to use L dot, but in this case we're going to use rim, because that's the name of our light, and close the apostrophe, and O, and then close bracket. And we'll add this into the diffuse display. So now we've got a rim in there. So if we IPR again, actually, yeah, that's right. So in the IT previewer, if you add them into the same display driver, it doesn't show up in the IPR. You can actually shuffle it out in Nuke still, I believe, but in this case we're going to have to create a new driver. So we're just going to call this one diffuse underscore rim, and I created that first because if I remove this before creating a new one and adding it in, it actually deletes it from the left hand side, kind of annoyingly. So we're just going to add that in. So we've got 2 of those, now we've got none. So if I had just deleted that, it would have deleted it there as well. So run that IPR again, and now we'll get our rim light. Oh, not rim. It's not key. I don't know why I called this key. I'm sorry about that. This is rim. It's not a key light. That was just an error. So rim, that's what we actually wanted. Now we'll IPR, and now it should work correctly. See, now we've got that backlight, which is creating our rim highlight there. And if you want to combine this and this, all you would have to do is change the what we are rendering field, the start field, and add it into here where we've just got the beauty essentially. So we would isolate the rim of the sphere, and you would not see any of the other objects. Okay, so another one we might want to do is the beauty pass, but we want to emit the ground. So emitting objects can be very useful. So you still get the reflection of them, for example, but you don't get the them visible. So this is something you'd want to use if you would normally use a render pass. You want to not see something in your primary visibility, but you do want to see it in the secondary. So we're going to call this omit ground. Call it whatever you want, obviously. Same again, LPE colon C for camera, open up. This is going to be full stop, and then so we're rendering everything, and then this is where we use a bracket, and we're going to say render everything, and we use the caret, which is Shift 6 on the keyboard if you don't know what that is, and render everything except ground, and we'd have to put that in apostrophes, ground. Close that bracket, close the other bracket, and then we're just going to do full stops, asterisks, and finish off like we usually do with a bracket and a L full stop, close bracket, full uppercase O and bracket. So we'll create a new display and we'll call this diffuse no ground. I'm at ground, add it in there, create a new node, and that will be in there like that. So we're on that IPR and we'll have a look. So there you go. So you can actually tell that you're getting that reflection of the ground there. You can see it in the highly reflective cube that I have. You can see it there as well. And if you compare the beauty to that pass, then you can see, hey, we are getting the reflection, but we're not getting it in the primary view. What if we wanted to do the same render as this without the ground, but just the objects, but we don't want to see the reflection? So we can do a separate IPR for that, a separate LPE for that as well. So we'll create a new one, and this is going to be called only objects. Only objects. So again, LPE colon, C for camera, open up, and full stop, because it's going to be a beauty pass. And we're just going to name our objects. So we're starting with sphere, and close that, and then we're going to do another object. So I'm going to use a asterisk there. Same thing again. Full stop, and then we're going to name cube, which I don't think we'd used yet. So there you go, welcome cube. Close that bracket again. We're going to use an asterisk, and we're going to finish like we usually do. And we'll create a new thing, and we'll call it diffuse only objects. Only objects is kind of a dumb name, but it's the name I chose off the top of my head. Only primitives except for the ground. It works. Alright, so we run the IPR. So no ground, and then no ground, and not visible in reflections, or not visible in the light path, as it were. So yeah, you can see that you can break it down quite a bit, and obviously you can break out your other types of AOVs. A lot of those AOVs you can obviously just render out separately. Your beauty pass does always include your diffuse and your specular. That is a combination diffuse, so it's diffuse, indirect, and direct, and your specular is always your specular, direct and indirect as well. So if you're using Nuke and you want to break those out, you can just use your shuffle node, and these, if I rendered this out now as a batch render, these will all be separate render passes or separate files. And as per always, we want to be using OpenEXR. There will basically never be a time where you don't use OpenEXR, and denoise if you wish. So that's a very brief overview of some of the ways that you can use it. Hopefully that gets your mind juices juicing. I will, like I said, link to the page on the RenderMan wiki. Make sure you check that out. That's got a lot of very, very good information. It's quite easy to follow. And now that you know how to set it up, it should be even easier to follow and set up your own LPEs. You'll feel like a wizard doing this. It's really good. It's good stuff. And I'll show you a scene that I worked on recently, a shot that I worked on recently that I used this method in. I actually used the rim light specifically. So we'll have a look here. Okay, so we've got my beautiful matchless amplifier here, and we're just going to run it down to a lower resolution. Let's have a look at my AOVs that I'm using. So the only thing I've really added in here is just for this one was the Z. And then I've got my AOVs, and you can see that I rendered them both under the same display driver. So, and then I just shuffled them out in Nuke, and I'll show you that in a second as well. So what I had was the rim light of the amp. I have a light just up here. I think you can just see it there. that I wanted to highlight the top of the amplifier, but I didn't want to get all this bounce light around on everything else. So I'm basically isolating it to the amplifier. There's a couple of different ways I could have done this. Thinking about it, I probably could have done it as set the light path. Well, actually I did set the light path, so maybe the way I did it was the correct way. So basically you can see here from my channel source, I've got my camera, and then I've got basically a beauty light, beauty setup, amp light, which is the rim light that's up the top there, and then close bracket, it is 1 bounce, so that is the direct lighting and no bouncing. And then the only light that I'm using is the light, sorry, the amp light is the that, I don't know why I called it the same thing. That's actually, the object is called amp light LPE. I don't know why I did that. And then I've got a separate layer, which is essentially my beauty pass, as you can see. Beauty pass, and then it is the entire scene. It's exactly the same as the beauty pass that I showed you at the beginning of the video, but I'm omitting the amp light, which is the rim light that I was using there. So we can look at that in IPR. You can see that the light in the beauty pass, in the standard beauty pass, is actually illuminating this back wall quite a bit, which, you know, doesn't look very good. This is the denoise version, which is, you know, looks a little bit closer to what the final render will look like, just so you can sort of see it in the video. So essentially what I wanted was this amplifier with this rim light, but I didn't want this second bounce here. And like I said, there's a couple of different ways I could have done this. This is just sort of the way I decided to do it, because the way I was compositing it, I thought it would be a little bit quicker, and it was. So turning off denoise. Oh, and obviously I can't show you the other channel because I've rendered them under the same display driver, but you can see the rim light. So I can't show you the beauty, I'll show you that in a second. I'll just bring up Nuke, but you can see that I've got that rim light rendered out separately. So let's jump into Nuke and have a look at that finally. Okay, so here is the final composite. Now, obviously there's a lot of other things that I've added in after the fact, but you will see that illumination on the back wall is no longer there. So if I just zoom in here, and there's a lot of other things going on in this scene, so don't worry too much about that. But we'll have a look at what I've got rendering out here. So what I've shuffled is the rim light, and then I've shuffled the beauty pass, which was that separate one I created, which is the beauty pass minus the rim light. So you can see that it is actually getting a little bit of illumination from this window I've got above in the shot, which you can't see, but you can see in the wider shots. But yeah, as you can see, you've got that, and then you've got that, and obviously I just shuffled out here. So I've got diffuse amp light, and I've got diffuse all else is what I called it. Really good naming conventions, Michael. So when I merged the two, which was just with the plus, you get that, and then then the good thing about it was that I can adjust how much of that rim light I wanted. Basically, all it was to separate it from the background and just create a bit of glow around the amplifier, really draw your eye into it. And it works pretty successfully. Obviously, if you look at the whole comp, which is quite big, with the grading and everything on it, it's quite effective. So you can really see how you can use something like that effectively to make things in your scene stand out when you're compositing. So yeah, that is the whole tutorial on LPEs. I've also given you a little brief overview of AOVs as well. I will do a proper rundown with AOVs. I promise you I'm getting there. I'll probably use one of these shots, though I probably need to use some other types of materials. But for the moment, this will do. This will get you started on LPEs at the very least. And I hope it's been useful for you. Check out LPEs. There might be a time where you use them. There might not be a time where you use them. But it is super useful to know. And like I said, you feel like a wizard using them. It's really cool stuff. So if you aren't using them, try a couple of just test renders on some basic scenes like I just showed you, and you might come up with something cool. If you did like the tutorial and you want to see more of this shot and others, make sure you're subscribed, because I'm going to be releasing this animation shortly. It's just a little study that I've been working on. And if you'd like to see more of my work, you could also check out my Instagram, and I'll have an art station up soon, I think. Otherwise, that is all for now. Thank you very much for watching, and happy rendering.